Recently, I posted a blog on X discussing one of my favourite kings, Edward the Elder. Edward was a son of Alfred the Great, and he was the linchpin in a crucial period in English history. Edward's illustrious father, at the Battle of Edington in 878, had just about preserved the future of Wessex with a crucial victory over the Vikings, who were threatening to overrun Wessex, as they had done in other areas of England. Edward's son Aethelstan would also win fame for himself with his own brutal victory over a combined Scottish and Viking army at Brunham Burr in 937, where it was said that no greater slaughter had ever taken place as it had done on that fateful day. Like Alfred, Athelstan had secured the future of his much expanded kingdom with a great victory in battle. But sandwiched in between the reigns of these two fine and mighty warriors, we have Edward the Elder, a king very few people who don't seriously study history would know of or have any active interest in. Whilst everyone knows the name of Alfred the Great, and Athelstan has Brunham Burr to shine a light on his name, Edward the Elder has essentially slipped off the pages of history. This is something that badly needs correcting. To an extent, the historical neglect of Edward's reign is understandable. Alfred the Great, through his own work, ensured that he would be remembered throughout the ages. Alfred's great work, his patronage of the Anglo Saxon Chronicles, is a wonderfully valuable piece that shows the toils and troubles of his own reign, those ages that had gone before him, and those still to come, including Edward's. For that, we owe Alfred the Great a tremendous debt of gratitude, and his standing as a national hero is indisputable. Alfred's wars against the Vikings were fought whilst Alfred was suffering from chronic illness, which sets him apart from most kings. But what also helps Alfred's cause in terms of modern recognition was the work of Asa, a Welsh monk who wrote a biography of Alfred. This again was really through Alfred's own doing. A lover of learning, Alfred sought out scholars and invited the likes of Asa to his court, and Asa's work, The Life of King Alfred, coupled with the Anglo Saxon Chronicles, means modern history readers can come to feel as though they know Alfred the Great well. So it's not hard to see why Alfred the Great perhaps outshines Edward the Elder today. But if you compare Edward to his son Athelstan, again, Edward seems to take a back seat. Unlike Alfred, there is no great contemporary biography of either Edward or Athelstan, but certainly the latter is more glorified, and I think it is fairly obviously because of Athelstan's stunning victory at Brunham Burr, which the Anglo Saxon Chronicles brings to life with a poem describing the battle that ends. Never before this were more men in this island slain by the sword's edge, as books and aged sages confirm, since Angles and Saxons sailed here from the east, sought the Britons over the wide seas, since those warsmiths hammered the Welsh, and earls eager for glory overran the land. It's stirring, it's exciting. Athelstan's great moment of triumph preserved his standing as the first true English king. The Anglo Saxon chronicles had ensured that Athelstan's legacy would resonate throughout the ages. For Edward the Elder, there was no such standout, singular glory, or at least not one to compare with Edington or Brunham Burr. But Edward did have his military successes, including at the Battle of Tettenhall in 910. Edward would storm towns and cities that had been conquered by the Danes and retook them into English hands. He built fortresses across his expanding domain, and in 920 he was recognised by the other powerful men in Britain, including King Constantine II of Scotland, who will be hammered at Brunham Burr, as the main man in Britain. Here then was a king of considerable might, although I would argue that Edward did not have that one glorious victory that his father and son had that would make him a prominent name in history books. there was one unique aspect to Edward's story as king. In 918, Edward would take control of Mercia, which had, in recent years, been greatly expanded by Edward's sister, the remarkable Aethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, unifying it with Wessex. Thanks to Aethelflaed's contributions and Edward's own tireless efforts, the path had been laid for Aethelstan to become the first king of the English. Edward's and Aethelflaed's story is like that of no other brother and sister in English royal history, and so perhaps ought to have made Edward stand out a bit more. But clearly it doesn't, and I now ask myself, why is Edward the Elder so undervalued as king? Well, simply put, it is because the attitudes of modern readers and historians are not all that different to medieval folk. A king needed an emphatic victory like Brunanburh or a triumph against the odds like Eddington to emphasise his worth. Edward's reign was dedicated instead to protecting his expanding lands and his new subjects. After defeating the Danes of the north at Tettenhall, Edward focused on the south of England, building forts at Hertford and Buckinghamshire and elsewhere, taking by force Bedford and Colchester. Edward brought Essex into line. Essex had earlier incited rebellion against Edward. From south to north, Edward had been relentless in what I now see as the war for England. Whilst Athelstan may be the first king of the English, that wouldn't have been possible without his magnificent father. Having said all this, it must also be stated that Edward was given due credit by certain medieval chroniclers. For example, Roger of Hoveden wrote of Edward: he, Alfred the Great, was succeeded by his son Edward, surnamed the Elder, who was inferior to his father in his acquaintance with literature, but is equal in dignity and power, and his superior in glory. For, as will be shown in the sequel, he extended the limits of his kingdom much farther than his father did. He also built many cities and restored some that had been destroyed. The whole of Essex, East Anglia, Northumbria, and many districts of Mercia, of which the Danes had been long in possession, Edward manfully wrested from their hands. Credit here should also be given to Athelflaed. After the death of his sister, Athelflaed, Edward obtained possession of the whole of Mercia and received the submission of all the kings of the Scots, the Cumbrians, the people of Strathclyde, and the West Britons. And William of Malmesbury wrote of Edward the Elder: Edward, the son of Alfred, succeeded to the government and held it 25 years. He was much inferior to his father in literature, but greatly excelled in extent of power. For Alfred indeed united the two kingdoms of the Mercians and West Saxons, holding that of the Mercians only nominally, as he had assigned it to Prince Ethelred. But at Alfred's death, Edward first brought the Mercians altogether under his power, next the West and East Angles, and then the Northumbrians, who had become one nation, with the Danes, then the Scots, who inhabit the northern part of the island, and then all the Britons, whom we call Welsh, after perpetual battles, in which Edward was always successful. The king devised a mode of frustrating the incursions of the Danes, for he repaired many ancient cities or built new ones in places calculated for his purpose, and filled them with a military force to protect the inhabitants and repel the enemy, nor was his design unsuccessful. So Edward was clearly highly thought of, but there is no question that he still fails to really capture the imagination. Today, it is kings like William the Conqueror, thanks to the visibility of the Tower of London and the story of the Battle of Hastings, and the great deeds of kings like Richard the Lionheart and Crusade, which stirs the minds of history enthusiasts. However, it was because of the work of noble kings like Edward the Elder that had made later events possible. Perhaps it is time we stop overlooking the great king that is Edward the Elder.